Hey, good morning, everybody. This is Josh Craven.
Hey, and this is Dean Cook.
Yeah, so here we are with another installment of Dean and Josh Write Fiction, trying to find an agent. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started talking about anything that's happened since last week. For me, I'll just give a quick update. I've been working on revising my manuscript for my novel, The Red Phantom, and in particular, my book contains several flashback scenes to some events that had happened in the past that kind of form the foundation for what's happening in the contemporary setting of the book. But the flashback scenes are really important, and there's about four or five of them. And originally, when I'd written the book, I summarized those. I wrote those from the perspective of the protagonist who was going back and doing some research on these events that had happened in the past. And I actually decided to take another approach at that and write those as kind of standalone stories and where they have their own narrative and we get a little bit more insight into the people that are involved and the stories as they play out at that time. And they're not lengthy, but just written from a different perspective. And so I spent time this week going back and reworking those sections in particular. Dean, what about you?
I continued on with my agent submission process. It went a little bit slower than I thought it would in terms of I'm starting to realize that what each agent wants in terms of a query letter is pretty different. And so kind of tailoring it to each one and to their particular needs was a bigger roadblock than I thought. Plus, with everything, it's just a learning curve. For instance, one wanted a plot synopsis. So I started writing a plot synopsis. I got to about 2.5 pages and realized I was going to have to go back and review some of the novel because I couldn't remember plot details in order to make the plot synopsis. So, but the synopsis I think was a good exercise, and so I want to finish that. So after about 2.5 pages into it, I decided to put that aside and continue on with submitting to easier agents. So I switched over and submitted to another agent where they just wanted like the first 15 pages and a basic query letter that I'd already written. So I sent out to them, but then by then my weekend was somewhat done. And then, from there, Monday through Friday, I'm pretty set or committed to my day job. So I didn't make much progress after Sunday of last week.
So, how many agents in total have you sent queries out?
Yeah, and that's like I said, it's taken longer than I thought it would. I've probably sent about 3 total so far. Hopefully, it is a learning curve, and doing anything new, hopefully that will speed up as time goes by. But yeah, it was 3.
When you're looking for the agents to query, are you finding a lot of information where the agents specifically say, if you don't do exactly what I say here, I won't even look at your submission?
No, I don't. Yeah, and it may be that I could get away with not meeting their criteria in terms of what it is they want, but I don't know that I really want to take that chance, especially since, they don't know me and I don't know them.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good approach. I definitely ran across several agents when I was querying agents in the past for Hellbender. Several agents that would just flat out tell you, if you don't follow these submission guidelines to a T, then your submission will be rejected. So I think that making sure you follow those instructions is definitely going to be pretty important.
Yeah, and I tend to think that they, maybe using that as kind of a basic criterion for whether they're going to be able to work with you, because if you can't meet those criteria for submission to them, then they may just see that as this person and I aren't going to work out.
Yeah, I think that may be true. When I was submitting not just to agents, but also to magazines and other markets trying to get published, I'd see a lot of advice where people would say, if you just follow the instructions, then you've put yourself ahead of 80 or 90% of the other people who are submitting.
Yeah.
I don't know that that actually ever really made any difference. I made sure I followed submission instructions. And as we've discussed before, Dean and I are both lawyers. And so following submission instructions and making sure that you tailor documents the correct way is part of what we do for a living on a daily basis. And so making sure my submissions were done the right way according to the guidelines was never difficult. It was something that I started doing from the beginning just out of force of habit. But I don't know that it ever really made any difference because don't know that I had any higher acceptance rate on my
Right.
submissions than anyone else.
And I guess I look at it as kind of like 85% of life is just showing up. Just to be able to show up, you got to meet their criteria. And I'm pretty much willing to do that. You know, if someone has really unreasonable criteria, I might skip that agent. But for the most part, I don't consider their criteria to be unreasonable. They're just, each one is slightly unique. And so it just takes time to tailor it to them.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, if I didn't have a day job, I could, you know, bang it out really quickly. But as it is, I just have to budget my time and, you know, recognize that I've got limited time to work on this.
So are you still using the Writer's Digest book?
Yeah, I've got my list of about 20 agents that I got from that book. I got a couple of other books. Like I got this one, which is another, I don't know, it's called Writer's Market 2020. I'm going to go through that one once I finish this list of 20. That's also from the library. And I also got this book, which I haven't really gone through, but I'll look through it as well and try to find some more in that as well.
That looks like a pretty good book. Were you able to get that from the library?
Yeah, these are both Plano Public Library books. You know, like we've talked about, I'm trying not to spend money on things, especially like that. I don't see the point in going out and spending. Each of these is 20 to 30 bucks a piece. So yeah, they're both about 30 bucks a pop. So.
All right, good deal. So what about queries that you have planned to send out this week? What have you got in the pipeline?
I want to just go down the list and try to hit, especially some of these easier ones. I do want to finish that plot synopsis because I think it's also helpful in terms of, I'm always a little bit worried about whether there's a plot hole or something in my novel that I'm not seeing. And I think if I go back now and do that, you know, 5-page synopsis of just the plot essentials, I can make sure that my plot is really tight and that there isn't any problem in terms of something not making sense or something like that. So I will work on that as well and hopefully get the synopsis done and then send it to that one agent that wanted a plot synopsis. And
Yeah,
my goal is to do 5 query letters at least for the week.
when I was submitting to agents for Hellbender, there were a few that wanted a synopsis. And of course, you have a brief summary in your query letter, but then
Right.
some also wanted an additional synopsis that might be 2 pages long. And each one of the things that an agent wants is difficult to do because, well, first of all, you want to do it the best that you can. But second of all, it's, you know, sometimes it's kind of trying to reinvent the wheel because it's one thing to distill your novel down into a 1-page query letter. It's a completely different ballgame to try to distill your novel down into a 2-page synopsis. Or if later on you're, working on your elevator pitch, 2 sentences.
Right.
It's each one of those ways of summarizing your novel and putting it in the context or the format that a particular agent wants is different. It's a
Yeah.
lot different to create a 2-sentence elevator pitch versus a 2-page synopsis or a 1-page query letter that incorporates your biography and explains to them why you're the perfect person to write this particular book. It really is kind of going through an obstacle. I mean, in some way, it's like American Ninja Warrior trying to work your way through the obstacle course of just getting your submission in the proper format.
Yeah, and I would also add to that in terms of your time. If you've got a day job, which most aspiring writers are going to have, you've got that. So you've got a 40-hour a week commitment on that. Then you've got to find time to write. And then on top of that, this is almost like a third job because really, I think to be able to do the agent submission process correctly, you're probably having to spend 10, 15 at least hours per week just on that, maybe more. So you're 40 hours a week for your job, then another, to really churn out, say 5,000 words per week, that's probably going to take you another 15 hours a week. And then you've got, another 15, 20 hours. So you're looking at, spending close to 60 to 80 hours a week, in terms of your time, including your day job. So it's a big time commitment.
Yeah. All right. Well, and so of the agents that you've queried so far, you haven't heard anything back from any of them?
No. And I kind of just, treat it like fire and forget. I'm just sending them off and we'll see what happens, and I'm not getting overly, I don't want to get myself overly optimistic, I guess. I just, do the work and see what happens.
Are you setting yourself any reminders to follow up with them? Or if an agent says, if you don't hear from me, then I'm not interested, are you just going with that?
Most of them, it seems like they have a, if you don't hear from me within 3 to 4 weeks, then I'm assuming I'm not interested. And so I'm just kind of assuming that that's the default for all of them, and that they're so overwhelmed that, I'm not likely to hear back from them. Treating it like you treat online dating, which is, for a guy at least, you're going to send out, a bunch of messages to women that you never hear anything from because they're just inundated.
All right. Well, do you have anything else to add on that, or you want to move on to other things?
No, we can move on. I think that's pretty much all I got done for the week, unfortunately.
Did you finish the associate?
I did not. It was a CD I checked out from the library, and the library is the worst. Like, the CDs will just be scratched to hell. Like, people just check them out and they do not give a shit about what happens to the CDs. And so they're scratched to hell. And when I play them in my car, they end up skipping a lot. I got about, a little bit further into that. I'm not enjoying it as much as some of his other stuff. I think this was written in the early 2000s, and I think by the early 2000s, Grisham was just kind of, I think Grisham's maybe been running on fumes for a while. I'm not sure how good his books are since the 90s. So
I agree with you. It's kind of one of those things that we talked about in an earlier episode, that story is really important and story can make up for a lot. I don't think Grisham is the best writer. And early on, I think this is true for a lot of writers. Early on, you've got a lot of good stories, and then once you kind of work through those, and you're trying to contrive new stories and new plots, and a lot of times that doesn't come out as well. And I think I think that's kind of true for Grisham. Like, early on, his stories were a lot more compelling, and then later on, his stories aren't quite as compelling. And I don't know that his writing for me is just a real page turner.
right. And I think there's kind of a recognized phenomena of writers writing themselves out, where they just get to a point where they can't come up with anything new. And that's probably a whole debate about why that happens. I've heard, like, Orson Scott Card, I want to say in his book, he wrote, several books on how to write fiction. And one of them, I think, was called Characters and Viewpoint. And he talks about trying to maintain your store of material for writing. And he kind of goes over exercises for it. And he says, like, one of the exercises he talks about is kind of, when you're out and about in the world, just thinking about why people are doing the things that they're doing, or come up with reasons why they may be doing the things that they're doing. And I think he gives the example of he was at the grocery store and saw a family, and, like, one of them was standing in line, and then, like, the kids would come in and they'd have items, and then, like, they hand them to the mom, and then, like, the dad would come in and hand it, and, like, they kind of, like, had this whole method of, like, spreading out and grabbing all the groceries and then, putting it, and he kind of tried to come up with a story around that. And he said, you need to do things like that to kind of keep your mind constantly coming up with new potential material for writing.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm sure that's every writer probably has a different way that they do that. And I think writing is an art, whether it's music or visual arts, painting or drawing or what have you. I think a lot of artists in the beginning have a lot of emotional inspiration. I don't know if it's from their past experiences or what have you, but those come through in their art. And then at some point you kind of tap all that out. And once you've exhausted that well of emotion that fuels the early art, then you have to find other ways to do it. And so I think that's when it starts getting difficult. And some writers do a better job of it. Some artists do a better job of it than others. But kind of the same thing in music. You know, you see a lot of artists that their first few albums will be great, and then they'll just kind of slowly peter out over time.
Yeah, or stand-up comedians are, I think, are the same way. You know,
Yeah.
their early stand-up is really good, and then, you know, not so much later. And I've heard that might have something to do with, especially the successful ones. It's like they no longer can relate to the common man, or, you know, they have no stories that, you know, anybody can relate to. And it's like, I think Jim Carrey was saying something like, you know, it's like, you're like, well, so I was banging 3 supermodels last night. And it's just
Right.
like, nobody can relate to that in your audience.
Yeah. Well, most art, I think, is born out of pain. And so, if you get to a point to where you've had enough success that you don't have any pain and misery in your life, then
Yeah, it's
it's
like you
hard
got
to.
the mansion and you got the 3 Ferraris and you got the supermodel wife. I mean, you know, what are you going to write about?
I don't know. Grisham may kind of be at that point. I've never found the legal aspects of his writing to be overly compelling, but I guess that's probably byproduct of doing it for a living. You really don't want to read a ton about procedure and the minutia.
Yeah.
I think that pretty much gets us caught up on what's happened last week and what we've got going on for the next week. And so we're gonna end it there, and we'll have some good content for everyone next week. Dean, you have anything else?
No, I think that's it. If you need to look me up, you can Google W. Dean Cook and probably find me that way if you want to talk about something.
Sounds good. All right, everybody have a good week.
Thanks.
Sorry, I got to start over.
I don't know why that's backwards. It's really weird.
Ah, shit. All right.
We'll get better at this as we go, I guess. And
What's going into the sausage here?
there's definitely some reflection off my head. Yeah, I may end up in federal prison.